In 1545, Spain discovered Cerro Rico, a mountain in Bolivia literally made of silver ore, and over the next century extracted enough silver to mint 3 billion coins. Yet Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times during this period of infinite wealth. Let that sink in. Spain found a mountain of silver, an actual mountain where you could chip the rock and find pure ore veins running through it like arteries. The indigenous workers called it the Rich Mountain because they'd never seen anything like it. Neither had anyone else. Between 1545 and 1560, Spain extracted more silver from this single mountain than existed in all of Europe combined before 1492. By 1600, Spanish America was producing 85% of the world's silver. Over 3 centuries, Spain pulled 150,000 tons of silver from the Americas, enough to fundamentally alter the global money supply. And yet, in 1557, just 12 years after discovering Cerro Rico, King Philip II stood before his council and declared the Spanish crown bankrupt, unable to pay its debts, technically insolvent. He would do it again in 1575, and 1596, and 1607. His successors added 1627, 1647, and 1680 to the list, 7 state bankruptcies, during the period of greatest wealth extraction in human history. So here's the question that nobody asked in 1545, but everyone should have. What happens when you find infinite money, but forget how to make anything else? Let's get specific about the scale here, because the numbers are almost incomprehensible. In 1503, Spain's first silver shipment from the Americas arrived in Seville, 5,000 kilograms. Impressive. By 1550, annual shipments had reached 150,000 kilograms. By 1590, 270,000 kilograms. Every year, arriving on treasure fleets guarded by warships. Here's how much silver we're talking about. If you melted it all down, you could pave a 2-lane highway from Madrid to Beijing in solid silver. That's not metaphor, that's actual math. But here's what makes this fascinating. The silver didn't stay in Spain. In 1600, the Spanish crown's own records show that only 10% of arriving silver remained in Spain longer than 6 weeks. The rest flowed immediately to foreign creditors, merchants, and military contractors. By 1640, Spain was importing 75% of its manufactured goods, including items it had produced domestically just a century earlier. Toledo, once famous for steel, was importing sword blades from Germany. Castilian textile workshops sat empty while Spanish nobles wore cloth from England and Holland. The country with infinite money couldn't afford to buy its own products because it had stopped making them. And that's just the beginning. Because the real question is, how does treasure destroy the economy that finds it? In the next 12 minutes, you'll see exactly how Spain's silver went from miracle to poison. You'll see how the price revolution, the first continent-wide inflation in European history, began in Spanish ports and radiated outward, quintupling prices in 80 years. We'll follow the debt spiral, how Spanish kings borrowed against future silver shipments, creating a financial trap where the treasure was spent before the ships even left America. We'll watch Spain's productive economy collapse, workshops closing, farms abandoned, entire industries vanishing, not despite the wealth, but because of it. And at the end, we'll connect this to a pattern that keeps repeating. From oil states in the Persian Gulf to mining economies in Africa, the same economic trap that caught Spain in 1557. Because here's what makes this story urgent. Spain's collapse wasn't caused by too little wealth. It was caused by wealth without production, money without making. And that distinction? That's the twist nobody sees coming. History is an open book. Watch as we turn the pages. Let's go back to the beginning. Before the silver. Before the bankruptcies. In 1492, Spain wasn't even Spain yet. It was Castile and Aragon, recently unified by marriage, recently victorious over Granada. The treasury was empty. The monarchs had pawned Isabella's jewels to fund Columbus. They were broke. By the 1550s, they controlled more wealth than any empire in history. The transformation began in 1519 when Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire and found gold. Lots of gold. Enough gold that when the first shipment arrived in Seville, people lined the streets to watch the carts roll past. Charles V, the new Spanish king, paid off his election debts to become Holy Roman Emperor. The treasury filled. But gold was just the opening act. In April 1545, an indigenous man named Diego Walpa was climbing a mountain in what's now Bolivia, chasing a runaway llama. He grabbed a bush to steady himself. The bush came loose, and beneath it he saw a vein of silver ore so pure it gleamed in the sunlight. Cerro Rico, the rich mountain. Within months, the Spanish had established Potosí at the mountain's base. Within 5 years, Potosí had 45,000 inhabitants, making it larger than Paris. By 1600, it had 200,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world, larger than London, larger than Lisbon, all of them digging silver. The mining operation ran on a system called mita, forced indigenous labor where men were conscripted for months at a time. They descended into tunnels that ran for miles inside the mountain, working by candlelight, breathing mercury vapor from the refining process. The mortality rate was catastrophic. One priest calculated that 8 million indigenous workers died in the mines between 1545 and 1800. The silver flowed out, the bodies stayed in. By 1560, Potosí alone was producing 300 tons of silver annually. The Spanish crown took the quinto real, the royal fifth, as tax. That's 60 tons of pure silver every year just from one mountain. And that wasn't the only mine. Zacatecas in Mexico, Guanajuato. By 1600, Spanish America had 150 major silver mines operating simultaneously. The treasure fleets became the economic heartbeat of the empire. Twice a year, convoys of galleons would sail from Cartagena and Veracruz, loaded with silver bars and coins, guarded by warships, following carefully planned routes to avoid pirates and storms. When the fleet arrived in Seville, the entire city stopped. Merchants, bankers, and crown officials would rush to the port. The silver would be unloaded, counted, taxed, and distributed. And here's where things get strange. In 1556, just 11 years after Cerro Rico's discovery, Philip II inherited the Spanish throne along with the richest empire in history. His annual revenue was triple that of France. He controlled silver mines that produced more wealth in a month than most kingdoms saw in a decade. 1 year later, he declared bankruptcy. How? Let's trace the mechanism, because this is where the paradox reveals itself. When Philip II became king in 1556, he inherited his father's wars. Charles V had spent decades fighting France, the Ottoman Empire, and Protestant rebels in Germany. Wars are expensive, really expensive. So Philip did what seemed logical. He borrowed money. The Fugger banking family in Augsburg would lend him money now, say 400,000 ducats, and in exchange, Philip would promise them the silver from the next treasure fleet, plus interest, usually 12 to 15% interest, sometimes higher. This worked for about 6 months. Then the fleet would arrive, the silver would go directly to the Fuggers, and Philip would still need money for the war that was still happening. So he'd borrow again, from the Welser family this time, or the Genoese bankers who'd started clustering in Seville. By 1557, Philip owed so much money that 68% of the crown's annual revenue, including the silver, was already pledged to creditors before it arrived. He was paying interest on loans he'd taken to pay interest on previous loans. On September 1st, 1557, Philip issued a decree. All debt payments were suspended. He would negotiate new terms, lower interest rates, longer repayment periods. The bankers called it what it was: bankruptcy. But here's the part that brings us back to that opening question, the one about infinite wealth and repeated bankruptcy. Stay with me, because this is where it gets counterintuitive. The silver wasn't solving their problems, it was creating them. Remember, in 1500, most European countries operated on a gold and silver standard. The money supply was literally limited by how much gold and silver existed. Prices were relatively stable because the amount of money in circulation was relatively fixed. Then Spain dumped 150,000 tons of silver into Europe over 3 centuries. What happens when you suddenly increase the money supply by 300%, but the amount of actual goods, food, cloth, tools, stays the same? Prices explode. Historians call it the price revolution. Between 1500 and 1650, prices in Spain quintupled. A chicken that cost 2 maravedis in 1500 cost 10 maravedis in 1600. Bread, cloth, wine, everything. But wages didn't quintuple. Wages rose about 20% over the same period. So ordinary Spaniards got massively poorer while the crown was receiving literal mountains of silver. And here's the most devastating part, the part that answers our original question about how treasure destroys economies. Spanish manufacturers couldn't compete anymore. Let's say you're a textile workshop in Toledo in 1520. You pay your workers in silver coins. You buy wool from local shepherds in silver. You sell cloth in silver. The system works. Now it's 1580. Silver has flooded the economy. Your costs have quintupled. Wages, wool, everything. So you have to raise your prices. But English and Dutch merchants can sell cloth in Spain cheaper than you can make it because their costs haven't quintupled. They're not drowning in silver. So you close your workshop. This happened across Spain. The Castilian textile industry, which had employed tens of thousands in 1500, was essentially gone by 1620. Spanish iron production collapsed. Shipbuilding moved to foreign contractors. By 1600, Spain was importing rope for its navy. Rope. The country with the world's largest fleet couldn't make rope. The silver made Spanish labor, Spanish goods, and Spanish manufacturing uncompetitive. Spain became a pass-through economy. Silver arrived, immediately flowed to foreign merchants in exchange for imported goods, and left. One Spanish economist, Martín González de Celorigo, wrote in 1600, "Our Spain has come to be an Indies for foreigners." The treasure was leaving as fast as it arrived. But Philip II and his successors couldn't stop borrowing because they couldn't stop fighting wars. The Netherlands revolted in 1566, and that rebellion would drain Spanish resources for 80 years. The Spanish Armada against England in 1588 cost 10 million ducats and failed. Wars with France, wars with the Ottomans. Every war required more loans. Every loan required pledging future silver. Every silver shipment caused more inflation, making Spain less competitive, requiring more imports, requiring more silver. The spiral tightened. In 1575, bankruptcy number 2. In 1596, bankruptcy number 3. In 1607, number 4. By 1627, bankruptcy number 5, Spain's creditors had learned to demand payment in Genoese banks, not Spanish ones. They didn't trust Spanish currency anymore. Too much inflation. The country with infinite silver had a currency nobody wanted. Now, here's why this matters beyond history class. What happened to Spain has a name: the resource curse. When having too much of something destroys you faster than having nothing at all. It's when discovering massive natural resources, oil, minerals, silver, makes a country poorer in the long run. And it keeps happening. In 1970, Nigeria discovered massive oil reserves in the Niger Delta. By 1980, oil accounted for 96% of export revenue. Today, Nigeria imports gasoline despite being one of the world's largest oil producers. Why? Because oil wealth destroyed the incentive to build refineries, to develop manufacturing, to invest in productive capacity. The pattern is identical to Spain. In 2014, Venezuela had the world's largest proven oil reserves, larger than Saudi Arabia's. Yet by 2019, the country experienced hyperinflation of 10 million% and widespread shortages of basic goods. Oil revenue went to imports and debt service, not productive investment. The treasure became the trap. Again. The mechanism is always the same. Resource wealth floods in, currency strengthens, making exports uncompetitive. Manufacturing declines because it's cheaper to import. The economy becomes dependent on a single resource. Then, when prices fall or the resource depletes or global markets shift, there's no productive economy left to fall back on. Dutch economists call it Dutch disease, after Netherlands' natural gas discovery in 1959 caused their manufacturing sector to collapse in the 1960s. Spain had it first, in 1545. But here's the modern parallel that should make us uncomfortable. The United States dollar has functioned as the global reserve currency since 1944, meaning the U.S. can print dollars and exchange them for real goods from other countries. It's not silver from mines, it's currency from monetary policy. Between 2008 and 2022, the Federal Reserve expanded the U.S. money supply by 40%, from $800 billion to $6.3 trillion. And in that same period, U.S. manufacturing as a percentage of GDP fell from 12% to 10.3%. The U.S. trade deficit in manufactured goods reached $1.2 trillion in 2022. The pattern rhymes. I'm not saying the U.S. is 16th century Spain, but the pattern looks familiar. Flood the economy with money, buy everything from abroad, and watch your ability to make things wither away. Because why build when you can just buy? And when Spain's silver mines started depleting in the 1640s, when the treasure fleets grew smaller, there was no industrial base left to support the empire. The economy had been hollowed out. By 1700, Spain had gone from the richest country in Europe to one of the poorest. Not because the silver ran out, but because the silver had destroyed everything else. So we return to Cerro Rico, the mountain of silver, the source of infinite wealth. In 1545, it looked like a miracle. By 1650, it was clear. The miracle was a trap. Every empire has a story. Spain's twist is that the treasure was the curse, that wealth without production is just inflation waiting to happen, that money without making is dependency in disguise. The mountain is still there, by the way, in Bolivia, still being mined, still producing silver. But Spain? Spain discovered something the hard way. Wealth and power aren't the same thing. You can't buy your way to greatness if you've forgotten how to build it. You can only buy time. And if you're thinking this sounds familiar, you're right. We've seen this pattern destroy empires over and over again. Next, we're looking at another empire that found infinite wealth in the ground, the Dutch East Indies, and how Indonesian spices made Amsterdam rich, and how that wealth created the first global financial bubble that crashed the world economy in 1637. The question we'll answer: what happens when money becomes completely disconnected from anything real? That story's already waiting. History is an open book.